the point is that it's going to be very hard for anybody over at ONI or DOD or CIA or whatever to come up with some reason. Well, there's a virus going around and a couple of guys are out sick. We need 3 more months. I don't think so. Even more importantly, by going public like that, he basically is the idea that they're going to come up with a big platter of nothing burgers like they have for the last 74 years. Not going to happen. They're going to have to deliver some goods. I'm not saying it's going to be saucers and maps to the underground bases, but they're going to deliver some serious stuff, and that's great. So that's coming. So that was very, very important to have Rubio say those things. In terms of Mellon, very important. Mellon, of course, also is now he's done interviews. Now, Rogan is one thing, 60 Minutes is another. All right. By doing these interviews, he's basically saying, I'm really involved in this. And if you listen to what he said, it's confirming what I've been saying now for some time. Mellon and Elizondo and possibly Steve Justice have been negotiating hearings in front of the Senate and House committees for quite a long time. And those hearings are coming very, very soon. One of the things he said was interesting is he surreptitiously got the videos from the Pentagon. I thought that was kind of fun. Elizondo confirmed that he's the one that declassified them, and they were declassified. And so Mellon didn't have to surreptitiously get anything. And by the way, if you take something surreptitiously from the Pentagon, you know what happens?
You wind up in Leavenworth.
5 days. Well, first you get interviewed for 5 days very intensely. What he's doing that is very cool. Essentially, look, there's people inside the Pentagon that are supporting them. This is not an official Pentagon program. There are plenty of people in the military intelligence complex who would like to cut this thing off at the knees. They don't want this. They don't want disclosure to ever happen. In other words, they have their enemies. And there's a lot of diplomacy here. And so by saying I surreptitiously taking it, it takes the onus off the Pentagon being labeled. Why did you hand that to Mellon? How could you do that? What's going on here? So it takes them off the hook a little bit. There's a lot of that going on. But I don't think it was surreptitious. I think he got it, and he did what he was supposed to do and took it to the New York Times. Elizondo pretty much said the same things that he said before, but strongly, right? Very strongly. They, as usual, walked all the witnesses, the pilots, they walked the issue right up to the line of there's ETs here. It stopped.
Well, hang on.
4 years.
Watching this, my reaction was, how can any of these people, serious people paid by the taxpayer, hold the idea that we have some secret technology that the Chinese have developed, or the Iranians, or the Russians, or the U.S.? Because if anybody had this, they would have cleaned our clock 70 years ago, and we'd all be living under some other regime.
I have the answer for that, Dick. It's pretty straightforward. Look, the goal of the TTSA, now, of course, the 3 key people have left the TTSA, which was necessary. From the get-go, the intention of this inside group of the Pentagon that knew that the truth embargo's days had to end was to get the congressional hearings, because congressional hearings end the embargo. Will allow the president to make the announcement once sufficient evidence has been presented. And so everything that's going on is to get those hearings. And so talking extraterrestrials,
goes straight on,
specifically saying they're off-world, all of this is not conducive to convincing and allowing the committee chairs and members to sign on to, let's get those witnesses in, let's hear what they have to say. And that has been the case from day one. And so whether you're TTSA or witnesses, by and large, you just don't want to go there. I don't think there was anybody on that show that doesn't know there's ETs here. I don't think there's a single member of the TTSA that doesn't know there's ETs here. There's so many people in government that know there's ETs here. It's really kind of funny. But saying it doesn't help. Now, in a sense, they're lying. But even if you want to call it that, it's for a very important purpose. No hearings, no disclosure. And so they're moving forward. They're making it increasingly harder for the press to stay out of it. And they're making it as easy as possible for the congressional people to hold the hearings, which is another reason why it's always cast in a national security framework.
Goes straight
Now, some
on.
people say, oh, that means it's going to be a threatened thing. They're going to say the aliens are coming to get us and it's all a false flag. No. If you're going to get members of Congress or committee chairs to hold hearings, it ain't going to be about how we're going to build the ET embassy to greet them when they come, right? It's got to be about something that's politically safe. Well, it's a legitimate national security matter. Obviously, they turn our nukes off, right? And so you cast it in that light. Makes it very safe and appropriate, and so it'll be national security. The witnesses will all be military people, maybe a few people who worked in classified defense contractor programs. Why? Because military witnesses are the best. They've already taken an oath when they signed up. Then they take another oath when they sit down at the committee table. Plus, we know about them. There's no mysteries here. You know when they were served, where they served, what their record is, what medals they have. A civilian can turn up with a cockamamie story, and you have no idea who it is. So military witnesses are the absolute best. I know this because I had a bunch of them at the citizen hearing on disclosure I put on back in 2013. All right? And so military witnesses, committee, national security issues, and then let the testimony begin. And once there's enough testimony on the table, could be 5 different committees over 3 weeks, then the president can come forward and say, I've been listening just like you have. I've been watching like you have. Wow, very convincing. I've talked to some key congressional leaders. I've talked to my top advisors in the national security area. And we have actually come to the consensus. This testimony confirms an extraterrestrial presence. And I'm confirming that to you today. And everybody are going, oh, that's very appropriate. Because everybody watched the testimony together. That's why there have been 8 efforts or more to get hearings going all the way back to Don Leo.
Well, you know this is going to be.
We can get them.
You know the hearings, wherever they start, will be covered 24/7.
It'll be the watched hearings at all time. I'm going to put the audience between 300 million and 800 million people.
Do we know
and
which?
Can you imagine being a committee chair on a nonpartisan issue?
Yep.
Where you don't have to play the stupid games?
Yep.
However,
Rubio did say something interesting. He said, there's some of my colleagues who are really interested. Then he said, there's some of my colleagues who are just laughing and giggling about this. So there will be opposition.
No, just because you're laughing and giggling doesn't mean you're going to be opposition. And let's be clear, as you know, Dick, if the committee chair wants a hearing, there will be a hearing, right? If a bunch of committee members say we don't want to do it, he'll say tough titty. Okay? They call the hearings, right?
You're our man in Washington.
Yes.
Which committee do you think is going to take the lead on this?
It's obvious. Senate Intel. It's already taken the lead, and it's the appropriate one. And it's kind of cool because you see Warner got briefed along with Rubio, right? But Rubio was the one that put the language in, but I imagine Warner signed off on it as well, and he stepped back. He let Rubio have the stage, okay?
Which was politically brilliant.
Yeah, now Warner is the chair. And so when that first hearing takes place, and it's the one that gets the ball rolling, because there's no way you're going to do a one-day hearing on this, right?
Oh, no,
Those days are over.
Keep right,
Rubio and Warner
right.
will be chairing that together. It will be nonpartisan. They will be getting the evidence, working together, and the American people are going to look and say, oh, God, I've been waiting for this so long. And everybody wins. The Democrats, the Republicans, the committee chairs, the DOD, it's military witnesses, the military, it's military witnesses, and, of course, the president, since he's handed the perfect way to finally confirm the ET presence without causing all kinds of chaos and not having to face a million questions. Well, why didn't you tell us sooner? And what did you know? And when did you know? All that kind of crap. Hey, that's what's going to happen. I've been predicting it now for months. The only thing that's real, it could have happened a little sooner. The thing that principally held it up, besides the odd insurrection, was the COVID situation. The COVID thing, it kept going, but now the vaccination schedule is pretty predictable. And so very soon, the ability to bring witnesses in, hold full hearings, full audience is there. And they're going to do it. They can't wait on this. As this kind of press emerges, the longer they hold it off, the more people are going to start going, what's the problem here? What's going on?
Well, just like the New York Times was the gateway to credibility in terms of the print press, in terms of, everybody reads the Times before they do their stories on television. 60 Minutes in the broadcast arena is equivalent. So the fact that this tonight was handled absolutely straight down the middle of the runway by 60 Minutes, when do you think we might hear about hearings? A couple weeks after
I think hearings can happen will be definitely possible by July. Something it could pop up at any time. And there's a little something else that's about to happen too. CBS now owns this issue. There are 3 networks. Well, there's 4 networks, okay? Not the news networks. I'm talking about the networks. ABC, NBC. CBS owns this issue. Now, Fox News is in there, no question, but that's primarily simply because of one person, Tucker Carlson. But let's take the other 2 networks, the big ones, NBC and ABC. They do not even have a ticket to the party. They are outside looking in, and I'm thinking the executives of those 2 major news operations are saying, what in the hell is going on here? This may be the biggest story in history, and we've got nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so I predict there's going to be an ET coverage war starting very soon between these 3 networks about who can get the most stuff out the door. Feel pretty good about that, Richard. Watch for it.
Fascinating. Okay, I think we've covered the waterfront. Obviously, you'll keep us apprised if anything develops sooner than we are projecting. I have a feeling July may be much later than is going to really happen. Because remember, an awful lot of people, constituents, want something that's bipartisan, where we're not sniping at each other, and which means something to everybody, as confirmation of an ET presence would inevitably mean.
Yeah. July is, I said when I think about the soonest it can happen. An announcement of some kind indicating they will happen could happen at any moment.
That's what I'm thinking, the announcement, and then everything else follows from that. Hey, Steve, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We will call you again, or you can call us if something breaks. That was Steve.
Happy to do so.
That was Steve Bassett, who is head and founder of the Paradigm Research Institute. And as I said, I've known Steve for a long time, and I'm actually rather gratified that this is moving in the direction it's moving, because he has put in so many countless unpaid and unsanctioned and credited hours trying to push this effort of disclosure for literally decades. So it's kind of nice to see it taking the appropriate turn. Moving on in our news coverage before we bring on our guest tonight. Item number 3, if you want to read some of this stuff, as I said, item number 2 is the 60 Minutes overtime page. If you go there, you'll see tonight's report with additional footage that they did not have time to put on the air. And on the same page, just to the right of the UFO Pentagon story, is the NASA Perseverance story from CBS's perspective. And I thought we would point you to the page as opposed to the specific stories, because there are a couple of items on that page that are worth your attention. Item number 3.
Turn left.
The Pentagon is confirming through this UFO footage the objects that apparently are defying the current laws of physics. And there's a bit of a backstory as to some footage that was provided by one UFO researcher, which did not make it into tonight's 60 Minutes interviews. And the story there is kind of interesting. In other words, are they saving more for future editions of 60 Minutes on this subject? If I was producing 60 Minutes, that's what I would do. I'll put everything in one basket. Item number 4. There's a very interesting story, rather in-depth story, in the New Yorker, which kind of tracks all the way back to the beginnings of this set of developments from some other insiders' perspectives, including talking, about people that have been involved for many, many years. In addition to Steve Bassett, we have Stephen Greer, who took to the lectern in 2001 at the National Press Club, and
and then
began the kind of public discussion after decades of this entire controversy, which has only gotten worse over the years. And you might want to read that backstory, because it gives you some more information to kind of fill in the blanks. Well, we're coming down to the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to hold off in introducing my guest until we come back after the break. I would like to presage what we're going to talk about tonight, in that our guest just fortuitously happens to have a very interesting background himself in national security. And so one of the first things I'm going to ask him is what he thinks of these developments, and who knows where that will take us. You are on the other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. We shall return.
One of the ways that this organized crime system has been able to monopolize the media and has been able to control the government,
Hitler,
to control perception on a wide scale, is because it's the banks at the core, and they've been given the privilege of creating money out of thin air using a technique called fractional reserve banking, where the central banks backstop the money center banks to create money out of thin air. So when you go to get a loan, whether it's a mortgage or a car loan, that's not depositor money that they're loaning you. They just credit your account with some dollar credits and you're off to the races. And then you spend the rest of your life paying interest on a mortgage that somebody created out of thin air. And that's the reason why the bank is the largest building in every city on the planet, because they're making outrageous profits by getting to loan money at interest that they created out of thin air. This is Etienne de la Boétie Squared, the author of Government, the Biggest Scam in History, Exposed. And some of my favorite conversations are the ones that I have on the other side of the news with Timothy, Netta, and Cynthia. Thank you for doing what you do and providing the service that you provide.
And welcome back, everyone. Sunday night, May 16th, 2021. My guest this morning is D. Arthur Guzner. The D stands for Daryl, so I'm going to call him Daryl. He never goes in public by Arthur. But he publishes under D. Arthur Guzner, so you're going to want to go to The Other Side of Midnight and the guest page and scroll down to his bio. Actually, under the banner, you can also just click on bios, and he's the first one on the runway, so click on that. Right next to his picture there, with a gorgeous little dog who unfortunately is no longer with us, there's a website, Galaxy Quest Books, and Daryl has written 5 books that kind of encompass some of the things we're going to be talking tonight. So without further ado, let me give him an appropriate intro. He was determined to serve his country at the age of 16. And so back then, which was some time ago, he borrowed his brother's draft card and joined the U.S. Army. After 3 years of honorable service, he then sought an education at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, where he earned degrees in chemistry and physics. Daryl's subsequent 20-year career was as a physicist for the United States Navy, where he specialized in, and this is interesting, submarine warfare. At the end of the Cold War, he turned his attention to marine research and exploration, where he is focused on the search for and recovery of historical shipwrecks. His experience as submarine warfare background influenced his books Guardian Force, Earth Guardian, Guardian Probe, Guardian Strike, and Guardian Thunder. Do you detect a theme in that? Anyway, D. Arthur Guzner and his belated yellow Labrador, Limo. Currently, he lives in Cambria on the central coast of California. And Daryl, welcome to The Other Side of Midnight.
Good evening, Richard. I am truly honored to be here tonight, and particularly on this night, which is a momentous night based upon what you have just revealed. And I've been sitting here listening to the report of what has come out with regards to the release of information on UFOs. And I'm delighted. It's long overdue. And I really mean that. I've only seen fundamentally one UFO in my life, but I have followed UFO phenomenon most of my life, and it's just wonderful to see the truth finally coming out.
Well, without telling any tales out of school, in terms of your national security background, there's a whole class of this phenomenology called USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Have you either seen one, or have you encountered individuals in your wide travels and, among colleagues and people in the armed forces and at various levels of the Department of Defense, have you ever heard or talked to people about unidentified submerged objects?
I have come across stories in my lifetime which were observations of ships that dove into the sea and then came back up and out of the sea. And that was considered to be something you don't talk about. So we don't and didn't talk about it. And I don't know that that data has been released yet, but it recently has been said that some of the F-18 pilots observed this phenomenon of ships diving into the sea and coming back out of it. Historically speaking, it's not a new thing. If you recall the book of The Damned by Charles Fort, he described a circular, a wheel within a wheel, much like Ezekiel did, and it was seen both in the air and one of the reports in his book, Book of the Damned. Charles Fort relayed a story of how a sea captain reported watching this thing, this circular thing, radiant light, cross beneath his ship as well as overhead. And the descriptions provided by Fort in his report were really wonderful because it gave you the rotation, the angular rotation of the wheel within the wheel. And it was a very good description. I pondered it for quite some time. There was another report in his book that described exactly the same ship that was seen on the east coast of the United States hundreds of years after Ezekiel saw it, of course, 1,000 years or so. And it was seen off the east coast to hover for quite a while. And then it, poof, with a flash of light, disappeared, as if it had gone between time. But I think time has a whole lot to do with what's happening here. it's an area that we know little about, and at least I know little about. It's an incredible story. It's a story which catches us up in our ancient histories. It catches us up in the Old Testament, in Ezekiel, as I said. It catches us up in stories like the Apostle Paul stated that angels are walking among us. So the ET could be among us. However you translate this material, I don't know. But the pyramid I talked about is certainly an anomaly. And it's spectacular, I think. Does that answer your question?
Oh, more than, but at least so many other questions. For instance, my personal theory, hypothesis, as to the reason for both the extensive cover-up of the UFO phenomenon for, as Steve said, over 74 years, and the equally bizarre and very anti-scientific cover-up of the reality of extraterrestrial ruins all over the solar system, with specific, focus on what's waiting on Mars, I think traces back to a common theme. And appropriately enough, here you are tonight to discuss the theme, which is somehow these two phenomena, which are connected at some point in this model, ultimately intersect with the history, the genesis, and whatever happened in our ancient and perhaps not so ancient human past. And I think that is the primary reason why all of these subjects have been taboo for literally decade after decade, because it's not aliens, it's not an other out there that we're going to encounter when this unfolds. It's in fact a reflection of who we are, the trail we got from there to where we are tonight, the suppressed history. And it's got to be one hell of a story of how we wound up on this little blue-green planet thinking that we're all alone, when in fact it's just the opposite, and it's somehow this entanglement of these phenomenon with the identity of Homo sapiens sapiens, which I think is the prime driver for the extraordinary energies and efforts expended in these cover-ups. What do you think?
I agree. I do agree. There has been a reason for it. And as for the cover-up, it's been solid, absolutely solid. As you recall, in June of 1947, we had the sightings of a group of UFOs over Mount Rainier. It was only a matter of a week or two after that sighting in June that on July the 3rd, there was a report of a crashed UFO near a SAC base in New Mexico, and that the Air Force at that time put out a open message that we had captured a UFO. That was withdrawn, as was the newspaper article in the newspaper that had come out just before that. And I think that changed the world. I really do. And this is my opinion. I can't tell you because I wasn't in the halls of Congress. And I don't know what happened in the halls of Congress. But I choose my data carefully. And if you take July the 3rd of 1947 and then spin forward and look how many weeks it took to do the finalization and ratification of the 1947 National Defense Act, which reorganized our military completely, created the United States Air Force, gave foundation to the first Secretary of Defense, and then just restructured everything to what? Not a Department of War, but a Department of Defense. Now, I don't have the answers as to what happened in that group. I don't know. But I know one thing. We had just finished World War II. We just dropped 2 nukes, and we'd seen the effect of those 2 nukes. I also know the fact that when they crawled across the wreckage of that UFO, and was there a UFO? All these decades later, they say, no. Roswell is a joke. Is it? There's a book out there, and I didn't write it. But those who did so with data. And that's called Witness to Roswell. It's a wonderful book, and I don't believe anybody with an open mind could read that book and not walk away saying there was a UFO at Roswell.
And who wrote Witness to Roswell?
Oh, there are 4 or 5 authors. and one of them was an astronaut. So my point being, I'm sorry, I can't give you that off the top of my head.
Well, this is where we introduce Brian, who is
Yes.
who is Daryl's AI. Actually, he's his nephew. But Daryl is blind, so what the research he's done and what he's going to be discussing tonight should be viewed in that light, that it's overcoming, some handicaps that ordinary researchers do not have to overcome. But Brian, you can, in your copious spare time there, look up who wrote Witness to Roswell, because I'd like to give people full background so they can go and find this book themselves, if you think it's perhaps the best chronology of what happened at Roswell.
I absolutely endorse it. It's as a marvelous book as far as detailed. I mean, I don't believe you can read the evidence that those people provide in that book and walk away saying, no, it didn't happen, this is a fraud. I don't think that's possible, not to an open-minded, analytical person. Brian?
Yes.
Let me introduce my nephew, Brian Gussner, and it's Gussner. Brian is my nephew. He's the eldest son of my beloved sister, who's no longer with us, and he's been kind enough for the last year and a half or so to help me, and I've been very grateful for that help.
Hi, Brian.
How you doing?
We're doing great. Okay, if you can look that up and then at an appropriate time interject who the authors were, and I presume it's available on Amazon and other
Yes,
good
it
bookstores, etc., etc. Daryl, let's swing into what we're going to talk about tonight, because I have been, and I can't remember when, always fascinated by this thing, this enigma by the Nile, the Great Pyramid. And I've read Piazzi Smith, and I've read Tompkins, and I've read,
a new route.
probably if I put all the books I've read on the Great Pyramid, they would stretch almost to the moon. I think you're kind of similar.
Turn right.
How did you wind up going from the U.S. Navy, operations, national security work, etc., service in submarines, to marine archaeology, to the Great Pyramid? There must be a hell of a story there. And we have time.
Wonderful. Well, it sort of came as a love of the ocean. And when I was 17 years old, I found myself on the USS Sturgis, which is a United States Army troop ship, crossing the Atlantic for a 2.5-year stint in Europe. And it was a hurricane. And so for 3 days and 3 nights, I was in that hurricane. And like a 17-year-old kid that hasn't any brains, I found an access way to climb up through the passageways and up through the chutes and get up on deck, which was absolutely violating every rule in the book.
Yes.
And I found myself on a little catwalk just below the bridge, and there was a little rail that I could put my feet against and brace my back against the bulkhead and hold onto the handrail. And I rode that ship down the face of a huge cliff, down across the valley below, and up the rising face of the next oncoming wave, which is taller than the ship, and watched the bow of the ship plow into that wave. And then we broke through. Well, when we plowed through that wave, tons and tons of seawater crashed upon the foredeck, came aft, hit the bulkhead, and went left and right. And I sat there for maybe 2 or 3 waves, and suddenly even my 17-year-old brain said, this is not very smart. And at that point, I opened the hatch and went back down and dogged it behind me. I never told anybody that story until tonight, I guess, except for a couple of family members. But sitting there and against my back against that bulkhead at 17, I had the impression of an enraged ocean. Winds at nearly 100 miles an hour, sleet, rain, and a ship literally faced into those oncoming waves, and we were there for 3.5 days riding that. And it was a momentous time in my life. I've never forgotten. And I've always loved the Navy, and I've always loved the Army too, for that matter. They were very good to me, and also the fact that we, I do. And so that is what brought me through. When I graduated from Poly, like I say, what I studied, and I only took one job interview, and I was offered a job to work with Admiral Rickover, and I turned it down.
Oh my God.
And the man says, why? He said, I can't tell you, Daryl. He said, you're making a terrible mistake to go where you're going. It's a production station. You don't belong in a production station. And I said, yeah, but it's the only underwater tracking range in the world. And I want to go there to work with APL, University of Washington. And he thought I was crazy, but I went up to interview with him, and he offered me the job, and it was a beautiful job. And I really brilliant GS rating they were offering me. And I thanked him very much for that offer. But I did decline it, and I did go to work at that no one ever heard of production station, and it changed my life. Literally changed my life. And I had the opportunity to work with brilliant officers, such as Captain Null, who was the Chief of Staff, Submarine Forces Pacific. And he directly directed me to do some work for him personally. And I found myself involved, one man, one civilian on board a submarine, checking it out for the captain, Submarine Forces Pacific. And Captain Null was just an incredible officer. And so that started it. And that's how I got myself into testing with submarines. And that's how I ended up developing the very first successful, totally integrated submarine fire control system that had ever been developed. And it changed the Navy in ways I don't want to discuss. But the point was, it was challenging for a young engineer. And I spent 20 years working, and I did have a chance to work with the Canadians, the Australians, and also the United States Navy for all those years. And I loved my work. I really did. I loved the ocean. I loved my work with the government. But at a certain point, my eyesight was going, and I knew that. So I retired. I went to my farm. I had a 200-acre farm in upstate New York. And I settled into private study. And that's where I got involved with maritime studies and other studies, historical in nature. And
do you know, let me interrupt, do you know Clive Cussler?
I'm aware of the name, but no, I've never met him.
Many years ago, when he was involved, I'm trying to remember now what the research was. He writes all these incredibly interesting, daring do, cutting edge exploration / skullduggery novels about marine research and oceanography and all that. For those that in the audience, maybe one or two who don't know who Clive Cussler is. He was involved in something peripheral to the discovery of a set of ancient ruins a half a mile down off the west coast of Cuba.
I remember that.
And there was a Canadian researcher and her husband who had a contract with Castro's government to basically catalog, I think, Spanish shipwrecks around the periphery of Cuba for whatever reason, safety or marking them in case treasure hunters tried to, take the stuff or Cuba wouldn't get a bonus or something like that. And it was in the process of this research that they tripped over accidentally with an ROV 2,500 feet down off the west coast of Cuba, this set of amazing geometric ruins on the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. And the problems in terms of tectonics, of how something could have been on the surface and then is 2,500 feet down, that's one of the mysteries. Who left it there? Because there, according to the sonar imagery I've seen, there are pyramids, there are plazas, there are streets. It looks like an entire sunken, extraordinary ET base, if you can imagine, sci-fi projecting with pyramids and, swooping architecture and all that, buried, half a mile beneath the ocean. Well, Robin, my significant other, who's no longer with us, got the bright idea one day, considering that we both were devotees of Cussler's work, to call him up and try to get him on the case, because the researchers had tried to make a deal with the National Geographic, and things were going along swimmingly, pun intended, and then suddenly all communication was cut off. And I had a personal experience with the Geographic and the Mars research I've been doing in a very similar vein, so I was prepared this was going to happen, because again, like there are cover-ups of ancient extraterrestrials, ancient archaeology, both here and elsewhere in the solar system. There seems to be a cover-up of things that are underwater that we're not supposed to know about. So Robin was actually, she was very good at this. She was able to get Clive Cussler's home phone number, his cell phone. And we called him out of the blue. And I have never, I have a reasonable background, Cronkite, CBS, NASA, etc. I have never been so cut off at the knees by an ostensible just author as we were in trying to talk to Clive Cussler about these ruins off Cuba. And the conversation went fine until we introduced what we wanted him to look into, and it was like he had been struck by lightning. He literally abruptly just terminated the call, and we could never get hold of him again, indicating to me that not only does the cover-up extend to outer space, it extends to the deep ocean. Have you looked at pursuing, given your, submarine background, have you looked at pursuing with maybe people at Woods Hole or people at Scripps or whatever, what's down there waiting off Cuba to be reborn?
No, I haven't. I have come across similar stories. There's a story that was told among the sports divers that I met of such a pyramid off of another island in the Caribbean, which I frequented. And I never went to it myself, but I talked to a number of people that dove on it, and they tended to be very closed-mouthed about it. But I do believe that it was there. Work I did was basically on the east coast of Florida and also in the Dominican Republic. And I was fundamentally looking for, when you look for something like that, you're out doing surveys using magnetometers and bottom scanning sonars and things of this nature. Mm-hmm. And you have a goal, a target you're looking for, but you're also looking for anything else that might come up. And I can say truthfully that we never came across the pyramid. That's a fact. But
I'm trying to remember this couple's name because I actually talked to both of them, and they dropped off the radar. It's like somebody had warned them, do not get involved in this. It's a taboo subject, and they had no resources to fight, governments or whoever is in charge of this cover-up. Going back to something we said earlier, then I want to return to the archaeology. Do you have the feeling from the people you talk to in the defense establishment that once this process is a little further along, once there are congressional hearings, it's going to be the literal breaking of the dam and an extraordinary fusillade of stories and people and witnesses and tales of extraordinary encounters are going to come gushing forth because everybody's been kind of waiting for this disclosure moment to finally happen?
I can't say that I have a feeling towards what the government will do about anything, to be honest with you.
I was not talking government. I'm talking the rank and file, the people in the services who have been muzzled for decade after decade of things they've encountered and witnessed and seen.
In truth, it was something that if you discussed, you did not discuss in specificity. You just didn't. It was, number one, tarnish your career. You were thought to be, quote, a nut, close quote. But the point was that some things did happen, and you just went on your way. But at times, if you were, shall we say, by the swimming pool between operations, you would discuss something like that, but not officially.
Okay, well, my dad was in the Navy, I was not, but I have this feeling that there is such a pent-up, shall we say, interest in this subject that all hell's going to break loose when the official chains of secrecy are released.
Keep left.
But that could be just me, and so we will see.
No, sir.
I'll tell you what, hold it there. We're at the top.
It is you, and it is everybody else too.
We're at the top of the hour. My guest this morning is Daryl Arthur Gusson. He is a former U.S. naval specialist, underwater warfare, I believe nuclear weapons kind of come into this at some point, apropos our discussion with John Brandenburg last night. And we'll get back to all of that, and of course his expertise in archaeology, ancient archaeology, and we'll get to the Great Pyramid. You're on the other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. We shall return.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com. Talk radio, with pictures on demand. Liberate your hyperdimensional time scale, and non-linearly access over 400 hours of conversation at the cutting edge of science and thought. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive content that fits your interests and time schedule. Filter episodes by guest or subject. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Talk radio, with pictures on demand. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
And welcome back, everyone, to The Other Side of Midnight for this Sunday night, May 16th, 2021. My guest this morning is D. Arthur Gusson, and we're talking about archaeology, ancient archaeology. Daryl, you know, after this career in the Navy, you obviously kind of gravitated toward marine archaeology, ancient shipwrecks, I presume. Few $1 billion in gold?
Oh, always. Everybody has that image. Are you kidding me? As a little boy, I had that image.
But then you had the Navy background, and you were retired, and you had all that free time, and you had all those contacts, and I mean, it was irresistible, right?
Well, I had the privilege of being able to work with some good people and some that were not so good. The pirates you mentioned about, and that was another part of the story. But I also had the opportunity to help fabricate and own a research vessel that was put together for shallow water work, but we had magnificent equipment on board from the standpoint of underwater survey and things of this nature. And we surveyed a great deal of area, and it's a wild story, and it's something I dare not at this point. I'm still involved with the government of two countries on this matter.
Oh, good grief! What a tease!
Oh, yeah. Well, it's true.
So we can't talk about her. We can't talk about does she have...
No. We can talk a little bit about it. For example, I was involved in an issue which involved the Captain Kidd shipwreck, and I had a contract, in fact, in which the ship was located. And what unfolded was, shall we say, very interesting. And also, I think that's what the correspondence is still ongoing after all these years. But it was an interesting story, and I met all kinds of wonderful people and learned all about Captain Kidd's real treasure and a story that's never been printed anywhere, and things of that nature. It was fun, a lot of hard work, and it involved me in exactly what you're talking about. Politics, if you will, on an island, whether it would be the Dominican Republic or on Dominica or other islands. It was intricate. It was, unfortunately, shall we say, island politics. And the things that unfolded weren't necessarily ethical. And I found myself as a man who had spent all of his time working with the United States government looking for something that was ethical. And I had a bit of a learning curve. But anyway, that's another story. But I enjoyed the work. very, very much.
Okay, without divulging any secrets, obviously, let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you still maintain contact with this ship?
Which ship are you referring to?
Ship that was devoted to underwater exploration. You said shallow water exploration.
That ship was appropriated by a foreign government.
Oh.
Unlawfully.
Oh.
And so it's one of the parts that have led me to still be writing to the Department of Justice, to the President of the United States, to the United States Trade Representative, to the FBI, and a whole lot of other people. Correspondence is a book into itself.
You going to write it someday?
I just may. I think I've already started it twice.
I mean, do you have any real hope of restitution, or has the statute of limitations kind of run?
It's wide open as far as I'm aware of. It was the action went forward as a First Amendment petition for a redress of grievance, and so that was formally done. And as far as I'm aware, it's still wide open. It's a criminal matter, not a commercial matter. I think there will be, at some point, a resolution to it.
And did this all rotate around treasure? Conventional?
Yes, as a matter of fact, and treasure and a historical ship, which, like I say, it's a long story. But I did learn some things that were fun at the time, and met some wonderful people. I mean, absolutely marvelous people.
Well, I guess my question was an oblique way of asking, do you know people that you could call and say, there's this really interesting place off the western end of Cuba in international waters. Would you be interested in going and taking a look?
I do know a couple of people who have that kind of background and who are still plugged in, that I could ask that question. I'm not sure what they'd be willing to tell me, but yes, I can ask the question.
Well,
I do maintain those contacts even to this day.
Off the air, we will have an extended conversation on this, because just as the Mars stuff is the breakthrough, I think, in terms of extraterrestrial civilizations in the solar system, there's stuff here on Earth, both underwater and in the Antarctic, that are equally, shall we say, provocative and potential paradigm shatterers. And they're so much easier to get to than the stuff on the moon or on Mars, at least at the moment.
Richard, our world is the most amazing place to live in the world. It's the only world we basically know right now. But in truth, wherever you look, you find miracles that you can't explain. I have been to some of the old ruins personally, both in Peru and elsewhere, and I am astonished by what I've seen. I have no explanation for them. I can't even begin to explain them. And the topic tonight about the Great Pyramid is one of those. It's an amazing monument. It's not a pile of rock. Anybody who thinks that was put together haphazardly or simply to entomb a king needs to go back and check his notes, because I don't believe that it was. It is an anomaly, and it is in my estimation, a database in cut stone, and it was left for a reason.
Okay, let us close one last loop. How did you make the leap from marine archaeology, shipwrecks, pirates, weird governments, expropriations, writing to the president, etc., to investigating the pyramid?
It went to my private studies, which dealt with looking at ancient history, looking at material relating to the Bible, if you will, and other civilizations, including the Persian kings and including Indian materials, and looking at historical documentation, trying to understand what it was that I was reading and what it all meant. And I don't know why anybody doesn't think there are ETs. They're all over our history. And the fact is, I don't believe that they've ever been disconnected from us for a long time. I don't think they suddenly, last Thursday, ET showed up. I think we've been watched for a long time. You find that in the book of Enoch, which is an old book, he spoke of the Watchers, and the Watchers were extraterrestrials, and no question about it. And Enoch took a journey up.
But isn't the distinction? Have we been watched and kind of shepherded, not as colleagues, not as equals, but as Native Americans stuck on a reservation with guards at the gates, that kind of thing?
Well, that goes back, of course, to Charles Fort in the Book of the Damned, because that was his supposition. His supposition is an unflattering one.
Well, he said we were property.
That is correct. I don't believe that by any sense of the word, but he did. I think.
Well, hang on. Charles Fort is a major name in this field. He thought we were owned by someone. Yes. Why do you, based on your research, think that's not true?
I believe there has been interference, interstellar interference, for a long time. This planet has gone through rack and ruin at times. We can talk about the Younger Dryas catastrophe, which was a meteorite strike. The waters and the seas coming up 400 feet. All these things are historical and scientific records. We can look at all this. How others living elsewhere viewed these things is actually the source of why I wrote 5 books. They are science fiction, but I hypothetically came up with one answer.
Isn't it funny how you physicists, you can't put it into fact. So like my friend John Brandenburg last night, plasma physicist, nuclear physicist, he turned out putting all his research into fiction, science fiction. And now we have, Daryl, we have you doing the same. Doesn't anybody just stand up and tell the truth anymore?
Oh, I try. But unfortunately, if you tell the truth, you're either sued or charged with something like leaking things you shouldn't, or killed, one or the other. It's a matter of trying to be prudent and speaking to the audience. The science fiction route allows you the liberty of fantasizing, if you will, and embedding in your story elements of truth that you can present as part of the story.
There used to be a whole Victorian literary genre called romantic cleps that did that routinely back in the Victorian era. Maybe we've regressed.
I think we have, and if you get into the action of litigation, one of the reasons I'm reluctant to talk about what happened in the Dominican Republic is there are people involved, and truthfully, there were crimes committed. I didn't commit them. I had seen it done. It was done, and I could tell you about it. But the point was, there are people who would not like that story being told. To what degree? I had a friend of mine in the Dominican Republic say, "Be careful, Daryl. The Caribbean is very deep." And so those were there, and he says, "You mess around with this person, he will kill you." And he meant it literally. So yeah, you kind of walk with a soft step.
Prudence, yes, prudence. Okay. All right, yes. So back to the Great Pyramid. You and I could talk for 20 hours, and we'll never get to the point. So we have to be a little focused. So the Great Pyramid, as part of your looking at the past, at archaeology, at ancient history, you kind of focused. Why the pyramid? I mean, there's all kinds of other ancient marvels. There's the incredible geometric stones at Teotihuacan up there on the plateau. There's Teotihuacan itself. There's Easter Island. Why Egypt and the Great Pyramid?
My mom and dad visited Egypt many decades ago, and they personally were there. My dad did not go into it, but my mom did. And I had the opportunity to go visiting, and for whatever reason, maybe it was the political tension and the fact that I did carry a security clearance, that I didn't want to expose myself to the conflicts that were in that area. So I stepped past Egypt. So I did go to Israel, and I enjoyed my stay in Israel and met some wonderful people, including a very, very, very good friend who's now gone. He was an Israeli airborne officer, and He went through more combat than any man I had ever met before. And one of the conversations that always would come up was the pyramid. And with my mom's stories at the inside of the pyramid, it was a natural. And then when I came across the statement which you have quoted about it not ever being discerned as to what the source of the Royal Egyptian cubit was, that struck my fancy bone as well. That's a challenge. Where did it come from? And it was on that challenge that I picked up the challenge and proceeded to see if I could look at it and make that determination for myself. And I had not the slightest idea where it would lead me. And I was as amazed as I could be when I did find where it took me. Because it took me to a place that's impossible. It cannot be. It's just simply by everything we call modern science and history, it cannot be. But regrettably, as I say in my white paper, the stones do not lie. And a ruler doesn't lie. And you have the physical measurements. You could discern, following the breadcrumbs that they left, what they did. And of course that leaves two questions, or three questions or more. When did they do it? Who were they? And why did they do it? Because it wasn't something they put together with beer money. That took a lot of work.
Well, in
So
terms
why?
of GNP, national,
Exactly.
national whatever. Okay, so let's start metonymically and try to follow, this story in a somewhat linear fashion. What is a royal cubit, and why should we give a damn?
The royal cubit is the standardized unit of length that was used by the builders of the Great Pyramid. And other than that, it doesn't have any real phenomenon, except that it has been noted that it's proportional to the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And it puzzles a lot of people, is where did it come from, and how does it relate to the equatorial circumference of the Earth? Well, that's a good question, but also, where did they get the information that said this is the its circumference? What is? Where did they get that information? And we're talking 4,000 years ago. And that pyramid consists of absolutely measurable, finite data that says they had it and had it cold. I question how and who built the darn thing. That's the whole issue. And it is a database, and it does establish that whoever built it to a very high level of precision, and that wasn't cheap. Ask anybody who tries to maintain tolerance in manufacturing of less than 100th
Keep
of
right,
an inch.
and then
And they
exit
did
right.
with granite stones.
Good grief. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning.
Exit.
The royal
Right.
cubit, as opposed to what, an ordinary cubit?
Well, the royal cubit is
Turn
unique,
left.
of course. It may have been in another pyramid in South America. I've not been able to verify that. But there are other cubits mentioned. The other nations had cubits. But the royal Egyptian cubit was pretty well defined as unique to the Great Pyramid. Like I say, it may have been used elsewhere, but the one everybody knows about is the Egyptian royal cubit. And like I say, it is connected to the equator
Get
in
ready
its
to turn left.
measurements, and how nobody understood. And that's why the search for its source was such a reason why some scientists and
Turn
some
left.
scholars went looking for it and could not find it. What I discovered had been buried in the annals of history for more than 4,000 years. So it is a significant discovery. And it's one which I say surprised me. I wasn't expecting it. I had no idea what I would find. I just followed the rabbit hole.
Okay,
And
so
what
the
I
royal
found
cubit
surprised.
is equivalent in English measure to what length?
It's unique. It's not equivalent to any length. It's 20.626 inches.
Okay.
And so what is it equivalent to? 20.626 inches.
So it's short of 2 feet. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And the question was, where did it come from? And when I started looking for that answer, I started looking for clues. And the first clue that I
Keep
found
right, and then
was
turn right.
In the Great King's Chamber. And it was there, and to me it was a clue.
Turn right.
For two reasons. Number one, it was the only artifact that was ever found, a major artifact, I mean sizable. They found a couple of small items down some chutes, but it was the only significant artifact that was found in the Great Pyramid.
Right.
And that was said to be the case when they broke into it, in the 800s, and broke into it, checked for all kinds of records and gold and pharaoh's bodies, and nothing was there. Only a stone coffer. And that stone coffer, being the only artifact in the Great Pyramid, suggested to me that whoever put it there had a reason for putting it there. And it was one of the things I noticed was it was of such a size that there wasn't anybody going to drag it down the downward sloping passages and out of the pyramid. It was too big to go through the passages.
So it's too big to have been. So it's too big to have been brought in, or to now have been taken out. Meaning, the pyramid had to have been built around it.
Or at some point they had inserted it through by going into a. I don't know of anything that says that they did that. It would appear they built around it, but I can't prove that as to how it got there. All we can prove is it is there. In fact, one of the things which I forwarded to you was a 20-second sound cut showing the vibration of hitting this thing, what it sounded like.
Yeah, since resonance and tonality and all that good stuff are going to come up, let me actually play this. This is really intriguing. This was a 1970s musician named Paul Horn, who actually did an album called Inside the Great Pyramid. We're going to play some of the cuts from the album as part of our musical breaks during the morning here. But this is Paul Horn after his very, very echoey introduction, which I'm not going to play because it's literally because of the echoes in that chamber, in the King's Chamber. It's almost unintelligible. But what he did then is he slapped or used a hammer, wood or whatever.
Palm of his hand.
With the palm of his hand, okay. The sides of this artifact called the coffer, which, kind of is a synonym for coffin. It's supposed to have held the Pharaoh's coffer in the mainstream view, which of course it did not, because its measurements are very intriguing. We'll get into those after you listen. But just listen to what it sounds like when Horn palmed or hit with the palm of his hand this granite artifact sitting there in the at one end of the King's Chamber in the center of this massive man-made mountain of stone. That's what she sounds like. Daryl?
Yes, It does sound like that. When Paul Horn took out a musical tuning instrument and measured the frequency, he found it to be 438 cycles per second. And he tuned his flute up to that and then played the music, which is on that album, and it's a beautiful album. But the point here is that it's a granite stone. It's made of, Aswan granite. And it was never intended to be a housing for a sarcophagus or a king's body. And the proof of that is they didn't find any king's coffin or body in it. And also it has this wonderful resonance. If you look at its dimensions, is it okay to speak about that this time, Richard?
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at its measurements, it appears, and please believe me, I am blind. I can't go look at it myself. But it appears to have been cut or sawn out of a larger unit of granite. And after it had been cut to specific dimensions, someone used some type of device. Some have said it was rotary because they can see the tool marks. But they bored this big block of granite out And it happens to be they removed precisely 50% of the volume, so that the volume of the remaining granite is equal to the volume of the cavity. And it's that resonant relationship of this hollow,
Get ready to turn left.
carved out piece of granite that you heard played, and like I say, 438 hertz.
Turn left.
So if you look at that, my question was, why is it there? Why did they do it? And the one thing I could not escape was 438. The reason I couldn't escape 438 and took it as a clue was the unit measurements of the Great Pyramid are 440 Egyptian royal cubits on each side. So 440 was not just an accidental number. Whoever created that block of granite and tuned it to vibrate at 440 hertz knew what they were doing, and they had a very precise reason for doing it. And so that was where I started.
Okay, let me stop you there, because the coffer as we know it now, and it's been, since people in the 1600s, I forget the guy's name, who went there from England to look at measurements and crawl over the pyramid and measure everything.
Right.
We know the coffer has been damaged. There's an upper chunk that was taken out of one corner, a sizable chunk. Right. Do you think that accounts for the 2 hertz or 2 cycle per second difference between 440 and 438?
It certainly may contribute towards it. But we're talking about a piece of granite. And I'm still marveling you can tune a block of granite. I'm sorry about that, but yeah, it would. Right. That's what I think may be the case of the two cycles per second. There's also the question of the precision of Paul Horn's device, electronic device, that he measured the frequency. Brian has actually used his guitar tuning device, and he's measured the sound that you just played, and it definitely comes up tone A. So I was pleased to note that before we submitted the
tone A being
A note A,
yeah,
on
but
a musical scale.
What frequency?
440.
See, that's the missing piece. For those in the audience who are not musicians. Sorry, Brian.
So it was that's where I got my start, and so I kept looking at that and trying to figure out what it was all about. And I played around with it, and the Egyptians were not known to use decimal points. In other words, it wasn't 3.141592. It was quite different than that. They found a fraction, and then they would work with fractions, and it was pretty close to pi, but the point here is the fact that they use fractions all the time. So I began to look at that as a ratio, as a fraction of something. And it came to me that we were dealing with music, octaves, and there was a relationship, there had to be, with 440. And what I tried to do was look at it and say, okay, what in the world is the wavelength of a 440 hertz signal? That's a pretty simple answer. So I looked it up through calculation, and the calculation. What's that?
I said it should be.
Yeah, it was. And so it turned out to be 30 point some inches, and that's nowhere near 20.626. So I looked at it and said, okay, what's the ratio based upon fractions of that relationship? And I checked that real quick. It's easy enough to do. And the answer came up 2/3, precisely 0.009 type of thing. I said, okay, we're looking at a ratio that's essentially 2/3. So I looked at that and said, okay, we're dealing with 2/3 of the wavelength of a 440 hertz signal in standard conditions. Now, for standard conditions, I went back and went on the web and pulled down somebody else's number so I couldn't be accused of fudging. And I looked at it, and what's the next step? Okay, I found the definition of where did we get the royal cubit. It was a result of somebody measuring 2/3 of the wavelength of a 440 hertz signal.
Wow.
Well, that caused me some problems. And the central problem was, are you joking me? We're talking 4,200 years ago, and you can't make that kind of a measurement according to our history. An accurate measurement of a 440 hertz signal and give me the wavelength of that frequency.
And then multiply it by 2/3.
Yeah, and multiplied by 2/3. And the question, why 2/3, came up, of course.
Of course.
But the relationship was obvious. It was 2/3 the wavelength of a 440 hertz signal.
Okay, hold on.
And how?
We are at the bottom of the
Yes.
hour. The witching hour here in the land of enchantment in the desert. And we're going to go out with Paul Horn, who's playing his flute in the resonance of the king's chamber, with the coffer sitting there, precisely cut so that its volume is exactly 1/2, like 0.999, of the outer external dimensions. Resonance on resonance on resonance. You're on the other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. We shall return. Richard C. Hoagland here. I'd like you to support The Other Side of Midnight by subscribing to Club 19.5 and thereby joining our unique and growing radio community. Tune in to listen to our fascinating guests, pioneers on the out there edge of science and thought, and gain access to exclusive member benefits. To do this, just visit our website, TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com, and click on the Join Club 19.5 link in the navigator bar or in the left-hand column. Membership costs $19.95 per month. That's 33 tetrahedral cents a day. I mean, it's the price of a couple of cups of coffee. As a Club 19.5 member, you'll gain access to this show and literally hundreds of previous shows on hundreds of different topics going back to 2015 that we've done. Our archive shows have the commercials removed, and you'll be able to download the MP3 files directly from the 19-point archives if you prefer. To enhance your listening experience, a new The Other Side of Midnight podcast is being added to all show pages, which will allow you to instantly search the show archives of Radio with Pictures, thus easily accessing the corresponding show. Plus, you can just as quickly access the entire podcast list when you're on the go. I want to personally thank all our Club 19.5 members because without your continuing support, this show would literally not be on the air. Please continue supporting the broadcast to provide you with the most interesting conversation available, talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought, and if you like what you hear on The Other Side of Midnight, tell your friends, and continue growing the show by having them subscribe to Club 19.5 as well, because we need all of you. When I say we need you, you're the reason we're doing all this. Oakland, for now. Welcome back to The Other Side of Midnight against the resonant tones of Paul Horn, humming in the King's Chamber in 1977 of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's against this literally resonant background, Daryl, that we're going to talk about the numbers and how they fit into a meta model of this as a machine. The Great Pyramid as a vast, incredibly massive edifice built specifically to resonate to certain frequencies and what they ultimately mean. So please continue the story.
I'm glad that you played Paul Horn's music a little bit. It's a good album, and it's a haunting album, because it's a way we can today hear the vibrations that were intoned within a granite chamber over 4,000 years ago. And it is a bridge between us and the builders. And I think it's a marvelous thing that you've done tonight. The question that came to my mind when I noted this relationship was, how can it be? Our history, our science, says that we did not learn how to measure accurately cycles per second and a sound frequency, if you will, until the 1700s. So going back 4,000 years.
Well, for one thing, you got to have an accurate clock.
Exactly, and that's the key. Right there is the key to the whole darn thing. And you've got to ask a question that very few people ask, and it's going to be fundamentally stated: why are there 360 degrees in a circle? You can go further than that to say, why are there 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute? Where did those values originate? Where did they come from? We have an object there called the Great Pyramid, which is the largest structure on the planet. I don't know of any bigger one, maybe there is. But the point, I don't know of it. And darn it, this thing was built on the basis of a 24-hour day, a 60-second minute, and it's fundamental to its essential design. And it proves by its existence that they had the means by which they could tune a block of granite to 438 hertz or 440 hertz. I mean, that's an accomplishment. And then they also could incorporate this building, this structure, precisely at 30 degrees north latitude, which says they knew exactly what that latitude was. And they built right flat on it.
And
then they
oriented the whole damn thing within 5 arc minutes of true north, and that may not be an error, because I conducted a calculation many decades ago assuming it was true north, given the precision with the rest of the elements of the pyramid. And if you do that, and then you calculate how long in terms of the literal plate tectonic rotation of the African plate it takes to produce an error of 5 arc minutes, you derive an age for the construction of the architecture, not just of the Great Pyramid, but the entire Giza Plateau and the other 2 pyramids, the grand plan that will boggle the mind, but in fact fits in perfectly with some dating I did 3 days ago of some things we find in Jezero Crater on Mars.
I am not surprised at all. One of the things I put into my white paper was, who were these builders? Where did they come from? Were they Egyptians, as we believe, Egyptians, or were they imported and were they from some other country? Part of the many things I've read indicated they were kings of a foreign land that came into Egypt. I don't know whether they were or not. I don't know where they came from. That's a good question. But I know the Egyptologists will tell you, they came from Cairo. And okay, that's good. They caught the subway out there every morning.
Very good, very good.
I have some jaundiced thoughts about that. I really do. I'm sorry.
All of us who have interacted with Egyptologists, particularly with Zahi Hawass, have some of those similar thoughts. I mean, I'm probably one of the only people in the world that kept the distinction, along with Robert Bauval, that Zahi threatened to have our heads cut off and thrown into a ditch in Egypt if we dared visit the Giza Plateau in person.
Now you understand why I didn't go to Egypt. I didn't mind going to Israel. They weren't fussy about things like that. Anyway, the point here is that they did build this thing precisely at 30 degrees north. And then when you recognize not only did they have the location of north latitude absolutely nailed down, they built a building, which is the largest building, I understand it to this day, 13 plus acres. And they built this monolith and encoded in its dimensions the precise value for the circumference of the Earth, which is within 0.5% of error from what NASA says the Earth's measurements are. And I don't think that was a good guess. They had precise data, and they were using technology, i.e., as you said, a clock that was precise in order to compute the velocity of sound. And then they gave us, as I think, a gift, 24 hours a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute. I think those were gifts. And I think it dealt with the precession numbers that are pretty ancient in there. Hamlet's Mill goes into the precession a lot in those numbers. What I learned in studying some of the old stuff from Hamlet's Mill and elsewhere was that the ancients encoded a lot of their scientific information by placing numbers of doors and numbers of this and numbers of that into a tale that they could teach the younger people about the traditions of their fundamental astronomy and things of this nature. They used that as a teaching tool, and some of those legends have come down to us. But the thing that fascinated me was when I did make the determination, and the vibrations, by the way, that you just played, shows a phenomenal characteristic of the King's Chamber. The whole King's Chamber is made of granite walls, and it has a floating granite floor. The walls do not rest.
Wait. Okay, I was going to say, define what you mean by floating.
Okay, it appears that the floor slabs are grooved, and they sit on other stones below them, and they vibrate, just like the coffer.
Oh, so they isolated it physically so it wouldn't resonate.
That's correct.
That's
and
incredible engineering.
Yes, it is. The 9 beams in the ceiling weigh tons, and they vibrate also.
70 tons. They're the weight of a locomotive. 70 tons apiece.
Yeah. How did they leverage those up there and get them to vibrate precisely? One of the references that I put into the white paper is of a modern engineer who went in the 60s down there, and Brian can give you his name. I think he'll find it. And the point is, he came back and gave his measurements, which he did with the latest and best instrumentation, and said that the best they could determine was that the entire King's Chamber resonated through many octaves to an F-sharp note, through many octaves. So there was a reason for doing
hang on. F-sharp is what frequency?
Brian?
I do not have that.
It's near the 440 area.
Google is your friend.
But the point here is that I am not a musician, and I admit that immediately. But his report is definitive, and basically he said it was an A note. So what we have here is an entire granite chamber, specifically constructed with floating floors and walls and ceilings that vibrate to a multiple frequency of an F sharp in many tones or octaves. Now, these are not my words. These are the gentlemen who took the instrumentation in and made the evaluation.
And what was his name again?
Brian? It's in my white paper. I'm sorry. It's right below Paul Horn, Brian. So I use this information, though, to make my next work. I tried to find out why 2/3. What was the importance of 2/3?
No, it was, Petrie was back in the 19th century.
That's the Egyptologist, Brian. Right immediately below Paul Horn's reference.
Because many years ago, I had a colleague in New York named Boris Said, who actually had an apartment in Cairo, and he stabled Arabians in the village that's right in front of the Sphinx, and he could come and go, and he knew everybody, and he actually brought a technical team, including a NASA engineer, and they measured the frequencies in the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber. And I'm trying to remember, I think his name started with a D, maybe the same guy.
That would be probably him, yes.
Tom Danley's the one below Paul.
Yes, Tom Danley.
That sounds very familiar.
But he was also a gentleman. His report, by the way, which is referenced in the white paper, talks of his actually being inside the Sphinx, in chambers within the Sphinx, and also going down an iron ladder below the pyramid into underground chambers. And I've never found anyone else who ever admitted that they were there. So I found his report very interesting.
Okay, so F sharp is a hair's breadth away from A.
Brian? He's the musician in the family.
Ah. You can just play it on the guitar, Brian. I'm serious.
Probably.
It's radio.
F-sharp
Come on.
chord.
Oh, darn. See. Okay. We'll have to make a checklist the next time you come on, Daryl.
There you go. I would love that. Nevertheless, the issue came up why 2/3. And the logical association, once I had found there was an association, was to then look at the outside dimensions
I'll
of the
find
pyramid,
a new route.
and I noticed it was 440, the same as the frequency,
Reroute.
times the Egyptian royal cubit. And I said,
When
okay,
possible,
what is the Egyptian
make a
royal cubit?
U-turn.
Well, I just
Okay,
solved that problem.
Let's find a new route.
It was 2/3 the wavelength of a 440 hertz
Make
frequency.
a U-turn.
Well, being a little bit of a physicist, I realized that if you multiply a wavelength times the frequency, guess what you get? Velocity of sound.
By the way, the F sharp frequency is 369.994, so 370 cycles per second, in that same range as the A440. So it's a couple half steps below A. F sharp, 370.
So anyway, what I realized is if you took the basic 440, which is the frequency, and multiplied it by, quote, the wavelength of that frequency, you ended up with a velocity.
The speed of sound.
Okay. Yes, correct. And so what I realized was that we had a ratio of 2/3 of a velocity of sound. And that was on each side of the pyramid. And I'm saying, okay, why 2/3? What again? Why 2/3? And I kept looking at that, and I said, well, what else do I know? If I had a element of time, a unit of time, and that velocity, it would become a distance. So I worked out the equation, multiplying 2/3 by this 440 by this wavelength, and I came up with 8/3 being 4 sides of the pyramid. And I said, well, where did that get me? And I said, well, let's look for time. And I had to hunt for the time, to be honest with you. And finally, I went back to that coffer, that 440, and I began to ask myself a question: is there some other reason to 440? And the only reason I could come up with was an odd
and then
one. But I had been
right.
looking at precession numbers and how the ancients use those precession numbers. And I said, okay, let's look at how many minutes are in 24 hours, 1440. So I said, okay, drop the leading one. You end up with 440. So I took this and went, okay, they're pointing us to time. A block of time times 24 hours. So we had a distance, a velocity multiplied by time. So I had distance. And I said, well, what does the distance show me? Well, it wasn't hard to run out the computation. And I found that if you took the velocity of sound as it was indicated based on a 440 hertz signal with that wavelength, it put me right in the middle of the ocean after 24 hours. I mean, in the middle of nowhere. And I said, so what does this mean? And I went back to my
See, as an
Egyptian.
old Navy man, you can't get away from the sea. Darn it.
Absolutely true. And so I kept looking at this thing and saying it has to mean something. So I went back to the Egyptian technique of they don't use anything but fractions. So I said, okay, if they use fractions, what does the fraction tell me? And converting the linear distance from feet to nautical miles, which I was comfortable working with, I found that it was a ratio of, if you will, the circumference of the Earth. And I said to myself, well, what must I multiply that length to be equal to the circumference of the Earth? And guess what? It was the inverse of 2/3 in effect. 4/3 to be 8/3, which is going to be 3 over 8. And so if you multiplied that distance by the correction factor, it got you to precisely the circumference of the Earth. So that 2/3 played into a correction factor. That they measured the circumference of the Earth as a velocity of sound plus a correction factor. That's the factor. And so I said, fine. But that didn't help me because the ratio was off. And I said, okay, I have 8/3 and it's supposed to be 4/3. I don't know, is that 4/3? No, it's supposed to be 8/3. Anyway, so I went back and looked at the calculation. And what I found is I went back and took the 2-to-1 ratio of the coffer again, and the 2-to-1 ratio of the floor measurements, 10 by 20, and held that 2-to-1 and went to an octave twice and a half as far as the frequencies are concerned, and said, okay, we're not talking about 24 hours. They're pointing towards 12 hours. So I was able to take the same numbers of velocity of sound, multiplying it by 12 hours, and I looked at that and we're still in the middle of the darn ocean. But the correction factor when made was precisely the relationship of 8/3, which was exactly the formulation that was of the pyramids, proportion 2/3 times 4. So that was it.
It's an interlocking geometric
Yes,
mathematical code.
exactly. And the point being, it's not something that's just a theory. Everybody comes up and says, that's just a theory. I'm sorry, it's not a theory.
No, these are measurements.
Simple mathematics on a ruler.
There are no unknowns. There's no X's here.
Exactly, precisely. And so, yes, it is a discovery of significant proportion, and it establishes that they knew the circumference of the Earth in a very fine text is equal to what NASA today can tell you. And I run those measurements out for somebody to look at.
Which, of course, is equivalent to the 360 complete circumference system of mathematics.
Yes, absolutely correct. And the point here is they are the people, whoever they were, that did give us 24 hours a day, did give us, 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds. They're the ones that say, tune your instruments to 440 hertz. I mean, they were there. They have been in our past, and they gifted us all this information, and we have forgotten as to where it came from.
Or it's been suppressed.
Or it has
And
been
after all
suppressed.
this time and all the research I've done, Daryl, I frankly don't think there are any such things as coincidences and accidents in all of this. I think it's been deliberately suppressed because we're never supposed to know who we are and who those builders were and why they came here, and that's the discussion for the third hour, and left us this thing which is there to be decoded as long as the Great Pyramid is in reasonably good shape. And there are redundancies. So if the exterior is eroded, there are redundancies inside that will lead you to the same conclusion.
All you have to do is measure the King's Chamber. It gives you some very specific numbers.
Which is protected by, 6 million tons of
Yes.
limestone.
It's a magnificent structure, and it is a database in cut stone, and it was fashioned intentionally, willfully, to be able to survive thousands of years to tell future generations we were here.
So let me ask you probably a politically dangerous question. I love those. Why did a brilliant genius like Stacchini come out so flatly against looking at any of this as having meaning?
You'd have to ask him. I don't know why he would do that.
Was he part of the cover-up?
I can't tell you. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, when I see brilliant people doing dumb and stupid things, I have to ask myself, what's the hidden agenda? How can bright people be consistent? It's like when I'm looking at the whole NASA crew, and every place we turn, every observation they're making reaffirms, where we are now, Jezero Crater, artificial, as far as the eye can see, including what's stretching overhead, and yet we have 500 people, as documented by our colleague Andrew Curry, who will be on in the next 5 or 10 minutes, and none of these people
Keep right,
seem to
and then
get it.
Right.
It's like they're either as dumb as dirt, which is meaninglessly irrelevant because you don't get a job like that, working at the cutting edge of science and technology for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration by being dumb and stupid, or they're part of a incredibly organized and masterfully managed cover-up, which is almost impermeable. Nothing has broken on the subject of Mars and what's in the solar system for over half a century, and we've had thousands of geniuses working at every different level on this, and nobody breaks cover. In fact, you have kind of Judas goats that lead people off in the wrong direction. The more I've read extensively Staccini and the appendix to Tompkins' book, the guy's not dumb. He's not an idiot. He's not, was he part of the cover-up designed to lead other scholars in the wrong direction? Because this is a secret we, ordinary humans, the great unwashed, are never supposed to know.
There are secret orders that have been around for centuries. Much of what has been taught has been concealed by these secret groups, and they've been around, like I say, for a very, very long time. What they know, I don't know. What they know may not even be right, but that they do exist, and there's no question about that. As to whether it's being exerted from outside in, there's a possibility that is true. It's like the cover-up for what happened in Roswell.
Well, wait a minute. Speaking of Israel, didn't some Israeli general in charge of their space command the other day basically say, there are ETs, they're out there, they're here, and they don't want us to reveal this because we're not ready?
I've heard that stated, and I've heard it stated.
It's in writing. He actually said it. It's not, this guy, on the record, he's now retired, of course. They all tell the truth when they retire. But he has a persona, he has credentials, he has a background, he has a reputation. For him to put that on the record flatly, that the cover-up is not being masterminded by us, but by them, he said, pointing at the ceiling, raises this to a whole other level and puts what Steve was saying at the top of the show in a very different context, because if there is going to be Pentagon disclosures, which is ongoing of this stuff, if there are going to be hearings, if the president ultimately is going to announce, yes, they are here, it must be with the tacit approval of whoever is running the show, and they may not be here, down here, right now, tonight.
I have no disagreement with what you've just said, none whatsoever. My study of history, my study of other aspects say that we have been in, shall we say, at least observed by the watches for a long, long time. There is a relationship, and I see that's really the question I ask. What is our relationship to them? And I believe there is a relationship. It's a one-on-one relationship, and we have not been told the truth.
Was Fort closer to the truth? We're property, therefore we don't need to know, and we should never know. You don't tell the sheep you're leading them to the slaughter. Or is it more like we're in a quarantine situation, and we have to mature to a certain level by our own bootstraps before, at an ethical level, we are deemed, shall we say, appropriately backgrounded to not freak out a la Brookings when this all comes out?
I don't think it's necessarily at that level. the idea of being quarantined, you don't have to quarantine somebody who can't drive. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere if we wanted until our technology came up to snuff. And once we have technology that reaches out to Mars, and I think perhaps beyond, then we become someone it's necessary to talk with, someone to talk to. But I believe that we have been watched a long time. I believe there's no way you can escape that reality. You can hide it if you want, because you don't want to cause people grief or troubles or miseries. And you've raised an issue about war on Mars. There is suggestion that there was similar warfare.
Well, hang on.
Earth.
We are literally at the top of the hour. That's why
Okay.
Paul Horn is playing in the King's Chamber in the background. My guest this morning is Daryl Arthur Gusman. We're going to be joined by some members of the Enterprise Mission Imaging Team. And you are literally on the other side of midnight at the witching hour of midnight here in the land of enchantment. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. Do not touch that dial, because if you do, you'll miss stuff. And you don't want to miss what's coming up.
TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com. Tune in to listen to Richard C. Hoagland and his fascinating guests. Access to exclusive member benefits. Listen to past episodes anytime on any device. Search the archives of over 180 episodes. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Support the broadcaster to provide you with the most interesting conversation available. Talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought. TheOtherSideOfMidnight.com.
God, I'd love to be there to hear him play that. It's all about resonance, everybody. Resonance, resonance, resonance. Okay, we have some of our resident Enterprise Mission Imaging Team crew with us. Andrew Curry, who is our resident artist, and when need be, therapist. We may explain that, we may not. Ron Gerbron, who is our resident generalist and who knows a bit about almost anything you could ask, including he found that we can post in your section of Radio with Pictures, Daryl, a sonographic image of the ruins underwater, half a mile down off the western end of Cuba. And I believe we have Tim Saunders with us, who is a nautical engineer. You Navy guys will obviously be taking over the rest of the show so I can go and have some dinner early. because you'll talk sea stuff and shanty stuff and
Hey,
green
Mr. Black,
stuff.
drive safe from your
Keep
friends
black.
over here at
Anyway,
BFT, brother.
everybody sound off who is here so far.
Terrorist.
You might want to do it one at a time. I hear Tim.
Permission to come aboard.
Ron is here. Andrew.
Permission to come aboard.
Granted. Well, guys, Daryl, this is a very interesting group of people. Before we move on, I kind of want to give our crew a chance to reflect on what you've revealed, or maybe ask a question or two, and then we're going to get to the next part, which is how this stunning mathematical and geometrical precision now appears to have a point of origin. Gentlemen, who wants to go first? See, they're also courteous and polite.
Oh, yes.
Okay, Ron, you spoke first, therefore you're in.
I was clearing my throat. Okay, well, yeah, most of this information isn't really a surprise. So I've been listening more to how it fits together, and I'm just following with the flow here. That Paul Horn thing is beautiful, by the way. Everybody should find a copy of the album.
Yeah, you can actually, it's an LP. You can actually hear the surface noise of the stylus in the grooves for you next generation folks who don't know what an LP record is, or vinyl.
I think they outsold CDs last year from something I read.
Really? Wow. Okay, Andrew. Andrew, you are up.
Yeah, I do have a question. Hi, Daryl. How are you?
Hi, Andrew. It's good to talk to you again.
Yeah. And you said something very interesting, and I wrote it down because it popped out like a live wire. And what you said is, what they know may not even be right.
Oh, and how interesting. Yes, I picked up on that.
Yeah. Can you explain that, Daryl? Because Richard and I and Ron and Tim, we've all been sort of in the back channels, not arguing, but kind of like a tug of war, wondering what the secret societies, the elite, whatever, what do they really know? Is their information fragmented? Are they looking to fill in the blanks? You know what I mean? Is the puzzle complete for them? Are they so beyond us, or? Because that was a very curious, a question that you put out there, or a statement.
Well, the best I can say is, having done the research I have, is there are secret organizations, and they're never a whole group. It's always a group and then a finite group at the top. And what they believe inside those inner circles, you'd have to ask them. I don't know, but that I do know they exist, and they have existed for a long time. And we see the track record around our world in history, and it's inexplicable at times why the violence, why the changes, why the struggle, and we can explain it in all kinds of matters. But I don't know what they know. I really don't. But I know that it's obvious that they do exist, and it's sometimes couched in terms of religion. And I believe they do have a vision. I can't, unfortunately perhaps, tell you what that vision is. But I think we're approaching what they basically have expressed to be a climax for whatever it is they're expecting. I think we're approaching that point. Maybe it's the problem that we're about to hear about in June. Something.
Or from the Chinese on the darkened plains of Utopia Planitia in the next few days.
Well, being a science fiction writer, and I'll put it in those contexts, and I think you've heard the term pirate before, there is an indication, in my estimation, and this is pure speculation, that we have, shall we say, been infiltrated for a long time, and there exists a group of people who say that's not right, and has taken a step into it to correct the situation.
Keep right, and then exit
what I think
right.
may be coming.
Sorry to interrupt, but with your nautical background, and we're going to bring Tim on in a second.
Exit. Right.
For many, many, many years, both privately and publicly, I have talked about the interlopers, those that came back to kind of, check out the family after the great diaspora in our model, humans, and I refer to them over and over again as the pirates, that we've been taken over by pirates. And it's so interesting that completely separately, because we didn't meet until just a few days ago, you're looking at this through a very similar lens.
Yes. And I hope, and I do believe that what's coming is something that is positive. And I do believe that will come about. And I have not one thing I can point to, except if you go to certain religious materials, that would suggest that is exactly what's about to happen. And I don't know, but I think we're a part of a much larger community.
Right.
I do believe that. And as far as the potential of ruins on Mars, I wouldn't doubt it for a minute. As to when they were built, when it happened, I don't know. I don't know a lot of things. In fact, I'm rather ignorant. I am basically an empty bowl looking for information. And some of it scares the heck out of me, to be honest with you. And some of it is encouraging and hopeful. I love this world. I love the people on it. And I don't care whether it's Chinese or Bohemian or anything else. We're all one family.
But we aren't aware of it yet, and that's what has to happen. That's the big thing that I think is going to change the downward spiral of history, when we realize we're all one family against an unknown and a history that's so staggeringly amazing, and bad guys that are trying to keep us from knowing with incredible, tenacity and stubbornness and willfulness over millennia from knowing who the hell we are. Because the way you take away people's power is you deny them their identity, who they really are. And we see this over and over again in history. Tim, let me bring you in. As one nautical guy to another, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, let me be very direct. I'm at a disadvantage because of my different time zone. I've not been listening to the beginning of the show. So I'm entering with an even more empty bowl than Daryl is. And I'm looking very quickly, frantically, to join up the dots to see what you guys are talking about. So let me just put that on the table.
Okay.
Richard, could I come in again?
Yeah, sure, of course.
That's fine.
Sorry,
Guys, one thing. You don't have to ask permission. It's a conversation, all right? Just break in, because if you don't, I'll just keep talking.
Keep right.
Sometimes.
Well, I'm gonna come back again, Daryl, to what you said about they may not be right. So, you and I had a conversation, and I'm not going to share it with the audience unless you wanted to at some point, and this might not be the venue for it. But you talked about a time when you were a young, naval guy, engineer, and you were in charge of some pretty sensitive material, and you had the top naval brass, basically say, you let me know any time if something is wrong, if something is not right. And to take that metaphor and transpose it now, in your estimation, are these people, are these secretive societies, are they looking for people like you? Are they looking for researchers who suddenly come up with the light bulb idea to kind of give them the call in the middle of the night and say, you might want to have a look at this? Is that part of their plan? I know it's speculative, right? But I just think that part of the puzzle is all of us. I get material sent to me by all kinds of listeners, and it's amazing what people unearth, literally, on Mars, with their eyes. And are they listening to us here in this forum? Are they waiting for us to tip our hats unconsciously to something that we see that they didn't? Do you see what I'm saying, Daryl?
I think that I do. I believe that there is intelligence watching us. And I know that there have been reports, and again, these are the types of reports which get suppressed immediately. Change channel to Bravo, don't broadcast that. And for example, one of the call signs on the moon by the astronauts was Santa Claus. Santa Claus is coming over the ridge. Okay, switch to channel B. I don't know what it means, but it sounded like somebody saw a UFO or something. All I'm saying is that what do they know about us? A whole lot more than we know about them. And are they there? Yes. There's no way I can say that anything other than